everyone, Dr. Laura Davis here. I just want to talk to you for a few minutes about your research essays and about narrowing down your topics for your research. So there are many topics, and so you will, with each of the topics, want to focus on one or two of the texts that we've studied in class as your primary texts, and then you're going to be reaching out and getting some research materials to use as your secondary texts. Now, as the assignment outlines, you do need one scholarly source and 3 sources in total. So that means that you need to find one source that is peer-reviewed, that is written for scholars, and you would find that through the RDC library databases. Please feel free to reach out to the librarians for help on this, and go to the RDC library website. Go into the various databases on your that might be relevant to your subject, and then you can search from there. Critical books on the subject can be useful, as well as journal articles, and many of these do come with full text. So you need one scholarly. The other 2 could be scholarly if you want them to be. You can get them in the same way, or they can really be from anywhere. They can be newspaper articles, they can be other articles that aren't necessarily peer-reviewed or scholarly, but they must be relevant to the topic and credible. So you want to be, when you're looking at your sources, you want to make sure you know who's written them, and if it's not an individual, what organization has written them, because sometimes those organizations will be coming to the topic with a particular bias. So you want to be careful to make sure you know who the organization is, what kind of, make sure this isn't propaganda, or what kind of agenda they might have with the article. You don't want to, for example, cite a blog by somebody in grade 10 because you have more expertise than they do on the subject. So it's not a very convincing source. So 3 sources, 1 must be scholarly, 2 may be general interest if they're relevant and if they're credible. Please do reach out to the librarians, start ahead of time so that you can talk to them about your subject and get them to help you find the articles that you're looking for that will be relevant to your essay. The other thing I would like to say about it is that you need to kind of narrow these topics down, and sometimes you have to be very careful doing that in terms of the research. So just as a few examples, the first one is about Chelsea Vowell's piece called What is Cultural Appropriation? And what I would sort of recommend with that one is doing a definition essay, much like she does, on the idea of cultural appropriation, and researching what others have said about the issue, how others have defined it. And so looking at scholars and other credible sources that have discussed cultural appropriation, what it means, and why we need to pay attention to that issue. Another example that I would talk about, because I have had in the past many students choose this one, is number 5, the topic on gender roles. Now, the 2 pieces that I recommend looking at if you're looking at gender roles are Scott Russell Sanders' piece that we studied and the one by Bell Hooks. You can choose one or both to talk about. When you're researching gender roles and you're using these 2 pieces as your primary text, you want to be careful not to just research the very broad topic of gender roles in the world. You will get things that are specific all over the place, right? I've had people find articles on gender roles in the Hollywood industry. Well, that's interesting, but it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with a Scott Russell Sanders piece or Bell Hooks piece. So I would recommend look at the context, the place and time out of which the writers that you're researching have come, and maybe think about that context in terms of the communities that you're researching. Because question number 5 does ask you to talk about communities, right? So gender roles and communities. So what communities are Scott Russell Sanders and Bell Hooks talking about? They're both come out of the US, so definitely you want to look at gender roles in America, and you might want to be more specific than that and look at, like Bell Hooks comes from an African American perspective, and she writes about African American communities, so that's one community that you could talk about in relation to gender roles and feminism, as she does. Scott Russell Sanders is coming out of the American South. He was growing up there in the 50s and 60s. So narrow your research down to something that's relevant in terms of the text that you're studying. Sometimes there are clues within the texts that can show you where to research. So if Bell Hooks mentions a particular name of a women's movement, you might want to research that movement, and that's kind of a heads up and where you can pursue your research. So make sure that the research you do, because the topics are quite broad, is narrowed down to the specifics that have to do with the primary texts. And so you do want to look at the context, the place and time, the author, what they're writing about, and focus on the primary text in relation to the issue that you're discussing. Sometimes you can look up other articles by the same author. So this would be the case in something like the David Suzuki topic. He's written a lot of different articles that are easily accessible, and so you might, as one of your sources for your research, choose another article that he wrote. You can also find articles about him and his work, and as long as they relate to the topic and it always costs to the primary text that you're studying, that could be very relevant. Basically, there's a lot of ways you could go with the research. I've left it quite open, but you do need to be careful for yourself to choose how you're going to narrow it down, and to make sure that how you narrow down your research and the way you pursue the research is related to the topic and the primary texts. Okay, that's all for now. Please, as always, reach out and ask questions if you have them. Thank you very much. Bye.